Hi there, greetings to everyone. Thank you for joining in. Today's discussion class is based on the cell. We are going to be gaining knowledge about the cell, animal cell, cells that make up our bodies, our body organs, from which we have the several body systems. Earlier on in our introduction, we saw a definition of the cell somewhere and we discussed that definition briefly to remind ourselves about that. We define the cell as the basic unit of structure and function of the human body, and we are still defining it the same way here. So the cell is that foundation for the formation of all other organs, for the function of all other organs and systems as a whole. So this series of classes about this topic, the cell, uh, the classes are going to be in a series of parts, which will be 4 parts. Part 1 is this introduction, parts of the cell. And then part 2 will be a detailed discussion about the cell membrane. Part 3 will be uh, detailed presentation about cytoplasm or the cytosol. Then the last part, which will be part 4, discuss about the nucleus. So those are the major parts of the cell that we are introducing in this part, and I present to you still Lujimbirwa Fortunate. To start off our topic, cells are structural and functional units of all living organs. Uh, they are building blocks, as you already know. That is the foundation for all the formation of all other complex organs in the body, which later on are arranged into body systems. And the adult human body approximately has uh, 75 trillion cells. So it is an approximation. It can be over that. Each cell performs specific functions depending on where it is located in the body, because these cells, we shall always find them arranged at the tissue level. Then at the tissue level, we shall get the organ level. So they always perform specified functions at whichever level that we shall see. And in humans, there are approximately 200 cell types and different cell types. And to look at the characteristics of cells, cells are looking at their functions in the body. They are usually aiming at sustaining life in different ways in this human being. So, in sustaining life, find that they will have to obtain nutrients from their surrounding environments or release waste products from within themselves, and certain biochemical processes, which biochemical processes have different uh, pathways within that cell, pathways that we later see as the biochemical cycles that we study. For example, glycolysis, ATP formation, etc. So those different pathways within the cell are always aiming at sustaining life in some way. So that is one of the general functions of cells and their characteristics. So that is the major characteristic for cells: obtaining nutrients and then releasing waste material. Some of the useful nutrients that we obtain or useful materials, you shall find gases, you shall find molecules. For example, ATP is a fuel molecule here. So one of the major useful gases in the body is oxygen. Then certain building blocks, the molecular level still, and certain minerals that we require for sustaining our lives in different ways. For example, the sodium, potassium, those are trace amino elements that we require the normal functioning of our body cells. Further still, uh, in their aim of sustaining life, cells will maintain also a particular shape and integrity of the body organ or uh, body system. So it has a particular structure that we shall always see, which structure will start at a cellular level, which are arranged in tissue organization levels. So in that way, they will always maintain a particular shape for a particular organ so that it functions normally. If we see a change in uh, organ shape or integrity, means the cells there in that organ are affected in some way. So there is a health condition going on. For example, in certain cancers, you shall find the organs deforming, losing form, either increasing in size or reducing in size, or taking up an irregular size. So cells function in maintaining shape and integrity of body organs and systems. And you have to note that size and shape are always are related to function. So certain tissues will always have certain cell shapes for a particular region. The shape of neurons, which are the nerve cells in the nervous system, we shall see the different shapes there, those cells, and why they are arranged in such shapes. It will not be the same as the cells in the eye, okay, in the cornea of the eye. It will not be the same cell shape as those in the tongue. So all those different organs perform different functions, but that function will always be related to the size and shape of the cells within that particular organ. The other characteristic of cells is cell division. So there are two major forms of cell division, have the mitosis and meiosis. So cells can help in growth and repair of body organs, certain body organs, and that process is mitosis. So they will always be constantly dividing in that way facilitate continuous growth of particular body organs or repair of damaged organs or tissues within the body. So in that way, they constantly divide to increase numbers for repair or for purposes of growth of body organs. On the other hand, we have cell division in terms of meiosis, where we usually highlight out gamete formation as the major example under meiosis. Their cells are not actively uh, increasing in number, but they are maturing to sustain particular specified functions. So those are the differences between those two types of cell division. Here in mitosis, cells are actively dividing and increasing in numbers, but in meiosis, the major aim is not to increase in numbers, but the major aim is to improve the structural complexity of particular cell types so that they perform their designated specific functions. So those are the general functions of cells in a way of sustaining life, but again, as common characteristics amongst all the different cell types that we have introduced. I've said we have approximately over 75 trillion cells in the body, which are classified under approximately 200 different cell types. So they will always perform these general functions. So, cytology is a term that we shall usually encounter in our uh, anatomy, and that term refers to the science that deals with the study of cells at whichever level, be at the in the human perspective, in the animals perspective, plants perspective, can be in the microbial life, microorganisms, that perspective. So it is always a study, a science that is dealing with the study of the different cells in organs or organisms. So that is the term cytology. And it is usually the approach that is usually used is the approach of microscopic anatomy, as we introduced earlier on. Microscopic anatomy is that branch of anatomy or a division of anatomy where we utilize certain gadgets or instruments that help us to study the body cells that we cannot see by our naked eyes. So usually microscopic anatomy is the division that is uh, undertaken in cytology. So we use particular microscopic instruments to study body cells. And it is usually microscopes that are employed in this division of anatomy, where we can find two major categories of microscopes, that is light microscopes and then electronic microscopes. Uh, in utilizing light microscopes, that technique or the techniques that we undertake are broadly referred to as light microscopy techniques. And then when we use an electron microscope, those techniques are broadly referred to as electron microscopy. So in electron microscopy, we shall always emit some electrons in form of light, and then we direct those electrons that are in form of light to these body cells that we are trying to study, and then we highlight out the particular structures within that cell and we study their form, and then later on we go into understanding their functioning. So that is the study of cells, which is known as cytology. Just to highlight out units that are used in measuring the cellular structures that we find there in body cells. It is usually the micrometer scale that is used, micrometer scale. So whichever measurements that are used in studying the cells, they will always be converted into that scale, the micrometer scale. Just to highlight out one example of cells in our bodies, that is the red blood cells, RBC. So a normal one is expected, a mature form of this cell and normal is expected to range within that size, 7 to 8 micrometers uh, size. So this chart here is trying to introduce us to the different levels where we can study cells, a term that we call cytology. So we can understand cells at an atom level, can understand cells at a molecular level, so molecules are made up of a combination of atoms in certain structural forms and arrangements. So we can understand cells at that level, at a molecular level. So it is the smallest level considered in terms of cytology. And then we can understand cells at a macromolecular level, where we can find examples such as proteins and lipids. We can also find carbohydrates at this level, and also vitamins at this level, and certain elements, mineral elements at this level of macromolecules. So we can understand cells at a macromolecular level, and it's usually a biochemistry that deals with this level. Then at this lower level, the molecular level, that is usually molecular biology. We can understand cells at the level of their interaction with other microbial life forms, or at the cellular organelle level. So we have an example of a cellular organelle here. So those structures that are found within the body cells, for example, ribosomes. So we can understand cells at the functioning of their, at the level of how their intracellular uh, organelles structures function. So an example here is ribosomes. We can also understand cells in relation to other life forms at the cellular level, for example, viruses, bacteria, parasites. So it is still cytology in relation to other life forms. We can also go ahead and understand cells at the tissue level, for example, red blood cells, the tissue level in the blood, the tissue known as blood, type of connective tissue. So we can understand them at that level. It is still cytology. And at a developmental level, where we can see structural changes usually with even our naked eyes. So the development of an organism from the start, for example, an egg form. Here I have an oocyte form, uh, a level of development. So you can understand cells in terms of change in structure at particular durations of time. So up to what the organism level here. So to introduce the parts of the cell, which is the main aim of this part one of this series of classes. Cells are made up of majorly three major parts, that is the cell membrane, the cytoplasm, and then the nucleus. Cell membrane, cytoplasm, and then the nucleus. So the three major structures of the cell. So we are saying cells, this is the first part, cell membrane, then the cytoplasm, and then nucleus. Those are the three major parts of a cell. So in studying cells, those are the three major parts that we focus on. But those three parts still have substructures, they are components that make up these three parts. So we are going to dive deeper into those structures that make up these forms of these parts of the cell, which we are calling the major parts. The other name for cell membrane is known as the plasma membrane, so that is another term that you can use to refer to the cell membrane. And the cytoplasm, here we are highlighting out some of the major subcategories or subcomponents that make up the cytoplasm, where you have the cytosol, which is the fluid part of the cytoplasm. Then we find there certain organelles, which we can further classify into two major groups, that is the membranous organelles and then the non-membranous organelles. These ones, the membranous organelles, will have they are surrounded by a membrane which is similar to the components found. So the components that make up the membranes that surround these organelles that we are referring to as membranous organelles in cytoplasm, their membrane is similar. The components in their membrane is similar to the components that we find in the plasma membrane. So they are close cousins, and we shall see a reason for that. How the membranous organelles will interact with the plasma membrane, and why they have those similar components between both parts. On the other hand, the non-membranous organelles that we find in the cytoplasm, those ones they don't have a membrane surrounding their components, internal components, but they have a coating which is usually protein in nature. These non-membranous organelles, that coating finds a way of interacting still with the plasma membranes or with certain membranous organelles, which later on package that material from the non-membranous organelles to fuse or interact with the plasma membrane, and then either the cell releases out something from its internal environment, or can introduce in something from the external environment. So non-membranous organelles can always interact with the membranous organelles, which further interact with the plasma membrane because they have a membrane similar to the plasma membrane. But the non-membranous organelles can also interact directly with the plasma membrane in some way. So to understand that, that is at a macromolecular level or a molecular level uh, employed in the study of cells. We also have inclusions in the cytoplasm, as we shall see. Certain structures there, they are just inclusions uh, within the cell. So, and sometimes they are temporary inclusions, they're not permanent. So with time, they either disintegrate or they are worked upon by certain enzymes within the cell, and then uh, they cease to exist within the internal environment of the cell. So the other part is the nucleus, as you shall see, its components. So these are the major parts of the cell membrane, cytoplasm, and nucleus. So introduce something about the cell membrane. Cell membrane or the plasma membrane is the outer lining barrier of the cell. So this purplish lining outside is the cell membrane, and then its major function is to try separating the internal components here, the intracellular components of the cell, from the extracellular surrounding environment. So it is a physical barrier between these internal components and this extracellular environment. That's its major function. We shall also see other functions as we understand more its structural components. So to introduce something about the cytoplasm, this is a general term that we use to refer to all the internal uh, intracellular components, whichever structure that we find inside the cell, as long as we are focusing inside the plasma membrane, inside the internal environment of that cell, any structure that we find there, it is considered uh, cytoplasmic structure. So basically, that is the cytoplasm, and it is and it is located between the nucleus, here, this blue structure, and this purple structure, which is the cell membrane. So here we find the cytoplasm lying in between those two major parts of the cell. So to introduce something about the nucleus, it is the control center of the cell. So it is like the headquarters of the cell. So that is where you find all the instructions. Usually instructions come from the headquarters. So this guy here, the nucleus, is the headquarter of the cell, where all the instructions, all the ministers will be instructed to do something in other villages found within the cytoplasm. So that is the nucleus, the control center. It controls a major process within the cells that we categorize under that term that we call protein synthesis, because most of the biochemical processes that occur within the cell require that process of protein synthesis. We first synthesize particular proteins that later on carry out particular functions of digestion, dealing with antigens, absorption of nutrients, etc. So it usually starts with that process of protein synthesis. This nucleus directs all the functional and structural characteristics of the cell. So it also has those instructions to direct uh, other structural adjustments that are required in different cells that make up different organs in the body. So that is how useful and how powerful this part of the cell is, the nucleus. And that is the end of part one of this series of classes under the topic the cell. So be blessed wherever you are and take care. Okay.